Chris Lee, Lovell, and Blayne Gilmer here aside our exploding graphics to talk the Alabama Crimson Tide, who are an interesting team coming into the season. I was reading up in Phil Steele today, and he made the point that Alabama always seems to do its best when it's not considered a national title favorite, although I go back and have a hard time remembering when that might have been. But in any case, Alabama is an interesting team for a couple of reasons, Blake. Quarterback is going to be a point of much discussion, already has been. I look around at some of their playmakers. I don't see the names that they normally have there in terms of receivers and running backs and star power. I don't know that there's a Will Anderson on this defense. On the other hand, I was doing some counting ahead of time, and guess what? Alabama's got talent. Alabama's got over 50 guys that were like consensus top 100 recruits in the class. I don't even think Georgia's got that. So it is an interesting time for Alabama because God knows Alabama's got talent and Alabama's got good players everywhere you look. But does it have the difference makers in some of the spots that it's had the last few years? And if not, how far can this team go? I just think this is one of the most fascinating teams that we've watched at Alabama in some time, perhaps.
Chris, you mentioned the word, consensus. You were talking about consensus top 100 recruits and things of that nature. Well, also a consensus is across all the major betting outlets out there for futures. Alabama is second, right behind Georgia in terms of national championship odds. And that's pretty impressive when you lose guys like Bryce Young and Will Anderson, who went as high in the draft, 1-2, as they did. So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect is, okay, you look at it last year, really, it seems like a down year, but Alabama was only a couple points, really from being undefeated. And then, but you look at the flip side of that coin, they were also a couple points from being a 4 or 5 loss team, because of some of the close games that they had as well. So it is an enigma. It is something that is fascinating to look at. But in terms of pointing out that, hey, there's Vegas doesn't like losing money, and things like that. So putting them at those kind of odds, I think there is a belief, especially defensively, that this team is going to be markedly better than last year, especially in the secondary. And we'll get to all that and on our individual breakdowns and stuff like that. But make no mistake about it, to your point, Alabama laden with talent, even more so than last year, in my opinion, with what they added with some true freshmen and in the transfer portal, and then just experience of other guys. And then to Blake's point, with the schedule being a little bit more favorable in terms of home versus away, I think it's going to create interesting dynamics. But there are some questions that I think you're going to hit on here as we transition to the offensive side of the ball for Alabama.
Yeah, and I want to hit on some stats here from last year because you mentioned how Alabama's season could have gone different ways. And you said kind of what I was thinking in terms of they had a couple of 1-point losses, but they were also, Texas A&M. Those could have gone the other way too. And sometimes you watch them like against Tennessee where they just got shredded in the pass and you thought, boy, this isn't the defense that we've seen from Alabama before. But then you go back and look at the season-ending numbers, and they were pretty good. I'll give you an example. Alabama gave up 4.1 yards per rushing play. Now, that's not great by Alabama standards. That's just kind of okay. And, again, rushing plays, a sack is a passing play. No, passing, Alabama gave up 4.7 yards per passing play. That is elite. By contrast, Georgia last year gave up 5.6 yards per passing play. I never would have guessed there was almost a yard difference between Georgia and Alabama against the pass. No, here's where I think Alabama, two places where Alabama slipped a little bit last year, guys. Turnover rate. Alabama only forced turnovers on 1.5% of defensive snaps. You go back to 2 years ago, that was 2.5%. 2019, that was 3.2%. By contrast, Alabama turned it over more last year per snap than it has in a while, 1.8%. Alabama been between 1.2 and 1.5 the previous 4 years. Penalties was another thing. I'll see if I can find that. Alabama, you always think of Nick Saban's teams as being really disciplined. Well, 2 years ago, 67 penalty yards a game. Last year, 69. And I think that might have been the worst in the league. There were just some things there with Alabama between discipline and just turning the ball over, which turnover rates and turnovers can be kind of random at times. And then you throw in the fact that, again, a couple of really close losses. How far off has Alabama really been from where it has been, guys?
That's true. That's true. Alabama wasn't very far off, but also, as I pointed out earlier, they had probably the best player in college football when he was healthy in Bryce Young. And that makes up for some of those small margins of it makes that look a little bit better, right? When you're a little bit off, maybe as a whole, when you have a super talent like Bryce Young. And that's the biggest question going into this year, Chris, is they don't know who the quarterback is going to be. It's still a competition. And one thing we do know, even if it is one of those guys, we feel quite confident in saying it's not going to be the level of quarterback play that they have had when you're talking about Tua Tagovailoa and you're talking about Bryce Young, even Jalen Hurts. I think all of these guys are a step down from that kind of quarterback play. So when you're talking about, okay, what does Alabama look like to make up those small little differences to get them back to being, just really dominant on the offensive side of the ball in every single game that they play, because that is what they are accustomed to now. It's going to look different. It's going to look like, okay, Tommy Rees comes in and he is bringing a mentality of restoring physicality and toughness to this Alabama offense. Nick Saban came out at SEC Media Days and said, hey, sometimes with Bill O'Brien there, it was pass, 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 pass. And part of that was because they would have so many RPOs in their system that Bryce could choose a pass even when it was, even it was technically a run play. Bryce had the ability to, get out of that run play and go to a pass, and that happened a lot for Alabama. They got very Bryce dependent, as Saban said himself. I think when you see the transfer in of CJ Dupree at tight end, I think you've seen the success of Georgia in 12 personnel. I think you're going to see that, one back, two tight ends. More with Tommy Rees. He did a lot of that at Notre Dame. He's going to bring that physicality. They've really kind of beefed up there on the offensive line. They have some young guys, but they have some very big offensive linemen. Added a really good running back in Justice Haynes as a freshman to supplement over there behind Jace McClellan. They've got talent and the ability to be able to do what Tommy Rees wants to do, but still going out and executing it and being able to get used to it's still Saban's system, because he's going to keep that terminology, Blake. We know that. He's going to keep that terminology around so players don't have to adjust too much, but you can't just flip the switch on mentality. It's going to take a couple of games to say, okay, we're not what Alabama was, a team that is going to just light you up and pass it whenever we want it through the, get it through the air. We're going to be able to establish some dominance, get the play action game going, and do things that way. I think that'll make up for some of those differences that we see for Alabama from a year ago.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just different expectations for what you have. I think quarterback and with a new coordinator, and I think just needing more of those big sort of, blockbuster type plays. Like they need that, I think, in this offense, the way it's constructed, but also know that you may not get as many of those. So yeah, it's an interesting setup. And again, that goes back to the beginning, kind of talking about just the dynamic of where this Alabama team is compared to some of the previous ones. But the talent's there. Just can they put it all together?
All right. Of course, the big question everybody's asking with Alabama, or the biggest question, is who is the quarterback? And it looks, as we do this the last week of July, we're week out of media days, it looks like it is a three-headed race between Jalen Milroe, who started, a game a year ago, had some extensive playing time, was very good with his legs, with his arms, or with his arm. I guess he doesn't throw with both hands. Little
He's not
mixed.
amphibious.
He's not amphibious. That's right. Throw an old baseball joke in there. Ty Simpson, the guy from Iowa State. I say that would be Blake and I. Tennessee, went to Martin Westview. He was a very highly touted five-star kid who threw five passes a year ago, completed four of them. He's in the mix. And Tyler Buchner, who transferred from Notre Dame and really good rushing numbers the last 2 years. But boy, 3 touchdowns, 5 picks a year ago. Is that where you want to cast your lot with this on offense? I'll start with you guys. Blayne, how does this quarterback situation shape up? And is Alabama going to wind up being good enough?
I'm fascinated by the fact that I was honestly shocked that Alabama went out after spring practice was over with and got a guy, because not only does Alabama have Jalen Milroe there and did they have Ty Simpson there as of the spring, but they also have 2 highly touted incoming true freshmen in Eli Holstein and Dylan Lonergan there that I thought, well, heck, maybe that one of those guys develops and comes into a guy maybe later on in the year, something along those lines. If one of the Milroe or Simpson doesn't get it done, but then to go out and get Tyler Buchner, who, yes, he knows Tommy Rees's system, but people have to realize Tommy Rees is not running truly 100% his system, because Nick Saban keeps his terminology and elements of his offense that are not going to change. That is a non-starter. You have to be willing to do that. Maybe that's a reason why 3 or 4 of the guys that Nick Saban wanted to come be his offensive coordinator didn't, but the guys he reached out to before Tommy Rees. But either way, now you have Tommy Rees, who was actually a major part in deciding for Notre Dame to go out and get Sam Hartman to replace Tyler Buchner, because they didn't believe in Tyler Buchner to be the guy there. Now you're telling me they're going to turn to him to be the guy in Tuscaloosa? Admittedly, a much better cast around Tyler Buchner, if that is the case, than he had at Notre Dame. So there's a lot of layers to this, and it would take a better trained psychologist than me, Blake, to figure out all the nuances there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to expect, and like I said, that's why we're having this conversation. I think about Alabama. It's just it is an unusual kind of feeling given who's come, the past several years, right? We've had the known and who's there, and who's going to be leading the offense from the quarterback position, and it's just different now. And I think, as I saw this earlier, we're recording this in July 24th. I think Ty Simpson is the betting favorite to be the starter in week 1. I think on 3, I'm seeing that here. I think it was Bet Online, I think, released its odds. Now, they weren't that far. I think it was Ty Simpson at plus 105, Tyler Buchner plus 140, Jalen Milroe at plus 300. So, if you're talking about 1 and 2 there's not a huge gap. But, yeah, but as we always say, right, as you feel like if you have multiple quarterbacks, you have, no quarterbacks. And so they've got to figure out exactly who's going to be the guy that can, again, like kind of what Blayne said, run the approach that Tommy Rees has to what they want this offense to be, but also knowing that, a large part of that's going to be whatever Nick Saban thinks it needs to be, given the personnel and all of that. But yeah, I mean, it all starts with the quarterback play. We say that about every team we preview, and this is no different. It's just that for the first time in a little bit at Alabama, we don't know who that's going to be whenever they kick things off.
The rest of their offense, it's starting to remind me a little bit of Georgia in terms of touches and star power. In other words, Georgia recruits at a very high level. It gets a ton of blue chippers. They spread the ball around. They've got speed. They got depth coming out their ears. I look at this Alabama room of skill guys around whoever the quarterback is going to be. You start at running back. You've got Justice Haynes that you mentioned, Blake or Blayne. You said you think he's got a chance to be a superstar for them. A lot of people would agree. They've got Jace McClellan, who I've been seeing getting some preseason all SEC love. Roydale Williams is a quality back who's been around a while, was second or third back on their team, I guess third stringer a year ago. That's the running back room, and they got other guys there too. We're not going to get too deep in the woods. Receivers, my goodness, Ja'Cory Brooks could be an all-SEC guy. Jermaine Burton could be an all-SEC guy. Malik Benson, JUCO guy, maybe the number 1 JUCO recruit in the country. I think people are very excited about him. You go further down the list of their backups. Emmanuel Henderson Jr., Shaz Preston, both second-year guys, both top 50 recruits. They've got Kendrick Law. They got Isaiah Bond. Those guys were top 100 recruits. I mean, they've got dudes everywhere. Jalen Hale, another guy, a freshman coming in, top 50 recruit. A lot of targets, guys. I don't know if there's a Heisman contender in here in their running back or receiver room, but boy, they are loaded with dudes, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, they are for sure. Like you said, you named off all those guys, and about production, and you can look at the numbers and combine it all together and get a pretty good picture of what they can be. Again, assuming that the quarterback play is what it needs to be, but yeah, there's just a lot of options, and I mean, I think that's what you always expect on this Alabama team, is that they're going to have some of these guys that there may not be one guy, like you said, that goes out and is a Heisman contender at a running back or wide receiver position this season, but you have a lot of guys who can combine to put up some pretty fantastic numbers. And I know, again, going back to, I think we talked about this earlier, I think just that, the need, especially in this particular offense with the way this roster is constructed, I think, for the breakaway plays, just the huge type of plays that you can get out of some of these guys. And I think Malik Benson was someone, I know it's been mentioned by a lot of people, just talking about the speed and those kind of things, but there are several guys I think that are like that in terms of just adding some speed to this group. And I think that's going to be very interesting just to see how it all comes together. But yeah, I mean, there's no shortage of options. And I think that's what if you have the questions about the quarterback position, what you can really like about this offense is that if they can just solve that piece of the puzzle and at least just be, good enough, right? Not that they have to be, great. They don't have to be Heisman Trophy level quarterback, but if they can be good enough, well, the guys around them are going to be good enough to be able to kind of raise, the ceiling of the offense. So yeah, there's plenty of guys, whether at running back, whether at wide receiver, that I think they've got playmakers certainly across the board here. It looks like.
Yeah, and to your point, Chris, that is a change in how Alabama has went about things. In 2020, that great offense with Mac Jones, you had Devonta Smith and John Mechie, who accounted for 53% of the receptions, 117 for Smith, 55 for Mechie. Then the next one was Najee Harris at 43 receptions. Then you look at 2021, and it's the same deal. When you have Williams and Mechie again accounting for 46%. So you had John Mechie and Jameson Williams counting for 46% of the receptions. Well, if you fast forward to 2022 last year, and it's just across the board, it's more even out. And the leading receiver in terms of receptions was Jahmyr Gibbs, who leaves. So I think you're going to see Jace McClellan and Justice Haynes get in that rotation. But along with these guys, like people forget, okay, so it may not be a Waddle or a Mechie or a Devonta Smith or a Jamo Williams out there, but these guys like Kobe Prentice and Isaiah Bond can absolutely fly. And they've got those guys on top of, Kendrick Law that's out there. Ja'Cory Brooks is highly underrated. And then Jermaine Burton's still around. He seems like he's been around forever. He's still there. Was it named, I think, third all SEC team preseason by the SEC media. So a plethora of weapons. And now they're starting to get tight ends more involved. Amari Niblack is a guy that people need to look out for red zone usage this year. He's a sophomore tight end, 6'4", 233 pounds, out of Clearwater, Florida, that back in the spring, we started hearing reports that, hey, you get down in the red zone, Tommy Rees is going to find a way to get the ball to CJ Dupree and Amari Niblack, and Niblack is just a natural, just natural athlete, can go up and high point the ball, a big body in the red zone. So Alabama by no means is devoid of weapons, but the touches are going to be spread out more evenly, Chris.
Yeah, Niblack was another top 100 recruit. Of course, he'll probably play second fiddle to CJ Dupree, the Maryland transfer who was productive in the Big Ten a year ago. Let's talk about those guys in the offensive line. The left side, I mean, whoever's quarterbacking, the blind side is going to be very well protected. If you go Latham, Dalcourt, McLaughlin from left tackle to center, the right side, I guess they're unsettled's not the right word. Maybe not as well known. Elijah Pritchett, who was the top 50 recruit 2 years ago, presumably the starter. He played a little left tackle a year ago. They got Tyler Buchner inside, another 5-star recruit. I don't know Caden Proctor, who was a top 10 guy in the class.
Massive.
Yeah, cracks the chart. I mean, it's typical Alabama offensive line.
Well, he's 6'7", 6'8", 350, 360
I mean,
pounds.
It's ridiculous. Guy. Yeah, I mean, look, it's not the names that we know where you're like, okay, both tackles are going to be first-round picks, and you just know. I mean, you just look at I mean, I say that Alabama fans are, but in terms of guys that have really proven it over the course of a few years, you've seen Alabama offensive line rooms that are better, but man, this one is just, again, they're loaded 3 deep with dudes that could have played anywhere, and I have a feeling it's going to work out.
Yeah, I think the main concern is how does Alabama quickly manufacture quality depth on the offensive line? Because I think the starting 5 will be just fine. But when you look at the depth chart, there is a great chance that they could have 3 true freshmen in that 2 deep, either having to be forced into playing time or forced. That is the one area that concerns me. I think even more so than the quarterback position, honestly, Chris, because I think the quarterbacks are going to be helped out a lot by Alabama's run game and that plethora of receivers over there. Tommy Rees is going to make things easier for these quarterbacks, I think, not put as much on them. But I don't care how good you are at quarterback or how good the system is around you. If guys are not prepared to step into that role and be a tremendous pass protector in the SEC, and we saw Bryce Young get out of plenty situations with his Houdini act, that these guys, even with Buchner and Milroe, if it's them being athletic guys, and Simpson can run too, they're not going to be as elusive as Young. So has that element of it improved enough for Alabama to feel good about to be a championship caliber program, as Alabama has been, as Georgia is now? You really need 7 guys that you feel like you can go out there with any time and start, 7, 8 guys that go out there and start and be comfortable with in, when it's 3rd and long and that it's a passing situation and they're going to bring pressure and all this kind of stuff. So I think that's the biggest area of concern, Blake, that, Nick Saban has not necessarily had to address a whole lot during his tenure at Alabama. It's been offensive lineman after offensive lineman. And to Chris's point, these guys are talented and they're big, but they're young in terms of the 2 deep.
Yeah, I think they're big, like you said, but it is you don't have the proven experience at the SEC level, and again what you're going to see on the other side of the ball at the SEC level, and who is going to be trying to challenge your offensive line to get to your quarterback, and again that puts more pressure on the quarterback situation. And so yeah, I mean, I think that combination of the offensive line, like Blayne said, it probably starts there, and then that's going to factor into sort of what the quarterback play looks like, because it all again starts on the line. So yeah, I mean, very talented, very big, but still a young group that I think doesn't necessarily maybe have some of that full-blown production that we're used to seeing from Alabama offensive lines coming in the season.
All right, let's talk defense. And look, I think if you start looking at Alabama, say the last 5 years, and comparing them to where they were 10, 15 years ago under Saban's dominant defensive teams, and look, they've been fine defensively, don't get me wrong, but we're talking about comparing them against some of the best defenses to ever play college football, which I don't know if the last couple have been that. But they've been pretty darn good, though. What I've heard is they've decided to go a little less modern and more old school with what worked. Because, look, Alabama used to line up, and you could name their defensive line. You knew they'd all play in the NFL. They had top 15 picks in the draft kind of stuff. Last few years, it's not quite been that kind of crowd on the defensive line. They're going more old school from what I hear. They're going back to bigger bodies, stuff to run. Look, numbers against running plays the last 5 years, starting with 2019, what they've given up: 4.4, 4.6, 4.6, 3.8, 4.1. With Alabama, those numbers probably used to be in the 2s. Anyway, back to where I was going. They brought in Kevin Steele, who is more of an old school defensive coordinator, I would think. 3rd time in Alabama. He's flipped his Auburn card and his Alabama card a few times there. Blayne, what are you thinking we're going to see on this front 7, which again will be minus Will Anderson, but my goodness, there's some names there. Jaheim Oates up front is maybe the next star in the trenches. They got Dallas Turner, who was a 5-star recruit. They've got some dudes there too.
Yeah, I mean, and Chris Braswell is kind of that guy that plays the hybrid role, that Jack, that sometimes his hand's in the dirt, sometimes he's a stand-up, but my goodness, is he a guy who he got overshadowed a little bit by Turner and Will Anderson in terms of media coverage, but man, he's as talented as any of them getting to the quarterback and being able to be productive. So that is something to look for up front, because it is still that sometimes they look like a 4-man front, sometimes it's a 3-man front, it's multiple. But to your point, guys like Jaheim Otis, they need him to step up and be that dominant nose that Alabama has been, known for all the way back to the days of Mount Cody. You remember when Alabama started making their rise in the SEC under Saban? Mount Cody over there, he was as synonymous with that as any person in that defense. So that is a huge part. And hey, it doesn't always have to be the guys who have been around. James Smith is as talented as a young guy as any in this class, period. He's an incoming freshman. He's from the Mobile area over there. He's right at home. Alabama was able to keep him and Quay Russaw. I wouldn't be surprised if either one of them ended up, being in the mix there to play, Smith at nose and Russaw more of that jack position like Chris Braswell. But between Otis, Tim Smith, Braswell, there's talent along that front. Now, the question is, just like we said with the offensive line, you need what, Chris? You need depth there in the trenches on both sides. You need to be able to roll. That's been part of Georgia's success. 6, 7, 8 guys on that defensive front that you can go. I think Alabama will be closer to doing that as they did in the past this year. But I think, Blake, that is a big key, is being able to do, as Chris said, a little bit bigger bodies, be a little bit more physical. And that also, what helps out with that mentality is facing some of that physicality in practice, because the offense has that mentality, and that's something that Alabama hasn't had. So I think that'll help this defensive line, Blake.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, you know what the expectations are. If you're if you're playing defense for Alabama, and you're especially on the defensive line, we see kind of like you talked about, the Mount Cody days, and just the disruption that they certainly like to cause on that side. And we know, again, kind of Saban's philosophy on that over the years, and bringing in Kevin Steele. And it's a defense that doesn't have a lot of returning starters. We knew that, though, with some of the guys that were exiting and they were going to the NFL. We knew that was going to be the case, but they just sort of reload with a lot of talent there. And like you said, I think Jaheim Otis and sort of anchoring that defensive front is just going to be, the big key. And if he can kind of do that, and being able to plug in some of these other guys that are going to come in and play prominent roles, just like anybody on an Alabama defense does every single season, it's just, you expect there to be some of those guys that, by the end of the year, we're saying, oh yeah, that guy wound up being, the stud at this position and that position. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that, it's going to be interesting, because you just look at kind of the dynamic and the way the roster sets up, especially in this front. Yeah, I mean, they're very talented. Like, I feel like we're in a common theme here, right? Very talented, a lot of talent. It's just, putting it all together, I think is the question with this particular team. So.
Yeah, they could probably make some kind of a drinking game out of our comments from the time. But I mean, you've got to acknowledge it. That's what they are. Secondary. I've heard some people mention this as a potential concern. I think we're probably having to get nitpicky if we go there. But I guess this is the case for it. Okay, they lose Brian Branch. They lose DeMarco Hellams. They lost Jordan Battle. 3 pretty good dudes there, but you look at where they pick up. They've got Kool-Aid McKinstry, maybe the top corner in the country. They got Earl Little Jr. out of Fort Lauderdale in his second year, I think, although I guess he's more the star position. Look, they got Malachi Moore, who's got a chance to be a top-level safety. Caleb Downs was a top 5 recruit. He'll probably play 1 safety. Terrion Arnold played a ton a year ago. I guess, played 11 games, had about 50 tackles. So he's got a lot of experience. I mean, I think, I guess if you look at it from the standpoint, guys, of who they lost, yeah, maybe, but this is, again, pretty talented bunch of kids they've got here, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, drink the Kool-Aid, man. I mean, it's I think you got to trust in Kool-Aid. Yeah, I know he was. He was talking media day, and he was talking about Terry and Arnold, and just kind of, I think that he was specifically asked the question just about, the secondary, and obviously, quarterback position, and having to replace, their top 3, safety. Yeah. I mean, so but they have the talent. You just list off the names that they've got there, and I think again, it's just you're plugging and playing. Like you're plugging in these new guys, and just expecting them to not have much of a drop off. That's just kind of what we've seen over the years with Alabama. It's just you sort of trust in the system, and you put you give Nick Saban the benefit of the doubt that he's got kind of the pieces that he needs. But yeah, I mean, I think starting with Kool-Aid and being able to kind of start things there, like you said, Chris, that there are going to be some people that bring up what they lost at that position and those kind of things. But still, I think once again the theme continues. I think there's enough, especially in this part of the group, that that they will figure it out and be able to kind of plug in these new guys and be able to make things work fine. So
yeah, I'm going to make a prediction that Caleb Downs not only will be the freshman of the year in the SEC, I think he'll make some straight up all SEC teams by the time the year is over with, because he is the most talented high school player on the defensive side of the ball that I've seen in person in a long time. He's a guy that has a NFL pedigree. He's a guy that his brother Josh Downs, did tremendous things at North Carolina, and now he's going to come in and he's going to start day one. Caleb Downs is going to start day one, and he's better than any of those guys that left at safety that you mentioned. And I think he will be early. Earl Little flashed in the spring. I think he can make some plays, whether it's at safety or at star, wherever they want to put him. Malachi Moore is going to be tremendous. The real question is, like you mentioned, Chris, who wins that other corner position between Terrion Arnold and between Trey Amos? Trey Amos coming in from Louisiana Lafayette, and we've seen, hey, don't chuckle at that. If you're people, we saw people come in from Louisiana Lafayette and have success for Billy Napier at Florida, Montrell Johnson, Cyrus O'Torrance over there. So those guys, the Sun Belt can play some ball as well, and so they'll be competing over there. But that's the big question. Terrion Arnold, of course, struggled in that Tennessee game, a year ago, but people learn, people get better after a year. But I think Caleb Downs is going to be the bright spot and the best newcomer in the SEC, bar none. The guy is special, and he's going to have a special freshman season for Alabama.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the transfers. Trey Amos was one of the better defensive backs in the Sun Belt you mentioned. They also bring in Jalen Key at UAB. I don't know if I was looking up something while you were talking about that. He was a guy that really popped last year. Those guys aren't listed on any of the two deeps I can find, so I don't know if they're more insurance policies or special teams guys or what. But if Alabama runs a little short of experience, those are two guys that have been around a bit and have some. We'll see if they can do it at the SEC level. But they certainly have done it, and particularly Amos at previous stops. All right, we always talk special teams. I don't know if there's much else to get into here. Will Reichert is one of the better kickers around. They brought in a highly touted recruit to replace him. He came back for his senior year rather than go to the NFL draft, so he's back for the fifth year. James Burnup. And how many Australian kickers and punters do we have in this league, guys? I think everybody's got one. He got better a year ago. Ja'Cory Brooks, Kool-Aid McKinstry, that'll give them two of the better return guys potentially in the country. I don't know what else to say about special teams here that I haven't already hit that's of note. So let's move on to the schedule. Blayne, I'll have you pull that up. And because I think it's going to be interesting how they start, because you've got the quarterback situation. Look, MTSU, I know that's a team that upset Miami a year ago. If they give Alabama a game, I will be stunned. And then you got Texas coming up, and then that weird road trip to South Florida. Don't know what's up with that before a game with Ole Miss.
We know what's up with that. We know that Saban is opening a Mercedes dealership in Tampa, and he's just going down there to scout things out. And he got that written in the schedule. That's what happened.
That's right. But anyway, point being here, this is not some other team's schedule where they basically get a pass on the month of September or the first couple of weeks to figure it out. Yeah, they'll have a game September 2nd that, no disrespect to MTSU, I've got 1 degree from there. But that should be a game that Alabama wins pretty handily. Then we get the rematch with Texas. This time it's in Tuscaloosa. And I guess that's sort of the bright spot here, guys. The two toughest games in the first four, and we have done a separate schedule video, are both in Tuscaloosa. That helps. Just not an easy break-in portion as they try to figure out who their quarterback is and some other situations. But look, few teams in the country are settled everywhere, so maybe we're overdoing it here.
I mean, I think that it's almost the perfect mix that you would want for Alabama with the situation they're in at quarterback, because even with Texas, Alabama is the more talented team across the board. When you go, 1 through 85, Alabama is the more talented team. Now, they have the biggest question at quarterback, but having that game, I would be much more worried if this was last year and Alabama was going to Austin, Texas in those first three games. But those first three games are going to be exactly what Alabama needs to get whichever quarterback it is prepared for that SEC schedule, Blake. I think it's really, exactly what you would want. Not anybody, because what Chris said, I wouldn't necessarily call MTSU and USF cupcakes. They're not like Ball State, like Georgia's getting to play, this year, and UT Martin. It's a little bit step up from that. So I think it's okay. It's challenging enough, but it's still enough separation where Alabama should be able to overwhelm those teams by talent.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. It's just the mix, like you said, you want. It's not 3 games we're going to go out and win 63-7. Like, you're not going to do that these 3 straight games, I don't think. So if they do, sorry, Texas fans, because it's going to be quite a reaction video we'll have for that game. But yeah, I mean, I think that's it. It's just a nice mixture. And like you said, it leads into an interesting part of the SEC schedule where when you just look at it, right, LSU at home, nice place to be. Tennessee at home, nice place to be. Have the bye week in between. We talked about that in the schedule preview. It just seems to set up as well as it could if you're Alabama, right? To have both those games at home, of course, have the bye week in between. Great setup. But, you do kind of have some of those interesting road games at an A&M, at a Kentucky, Mississippi State. We talked about, could they kind of be a team that exceeds expectations? Auburn, we don't know where they're going to be at November 25th. What will Hugh Freeze's first season have looked like to that point? So you still got any game on the road, you're Alabama, you're going to have that target on you. But having the games, at least with what our projections are for these teams, having the toughest games at home as of right now, you can go down the list here on the schedule, right? The top, number 10 team, number 22 team, number 11 team, number 7 team, all at home. Yeah, you got to go to Kentucky, number 24 team. That won't be easy, but that's just kind of way the schedule sets up, and all we can go on is what we have now. And to me, there's a lot to like about this schedule. Not necessarily because it's easy, just when you compare it to what it could be, maybe with a couple of those top 25 opponents flipped to a road game. So
I agree.
Any parting thoughts on the Crimson Tide? I'll start with you, Blake.
Well, I mean, again, we can talk about all the questions we have, and certainly, like we said, it all starts with the quarterback position. But when you just go down the list, and we started the conversation with this, and you just go down the roster, and you see all the talent, and you see all the accolades from the players on this team, you just give Nick Saban, I think, the benefit of the doubt. And I think we have to remember too, right? It's go back to last season. You're basically 2 losses at the buzzer away from being right that, like, it's losing the LSU game, losing the Tennessee game. It's a different team this year, but like they're always there. And I think it's, look, the SEC media picked Alabama to win the West because of course they did. Like, that's just what you look at with this team, and you just expect them to figure out these questions we have. We may have more questions this heading into this season than we have had in recent years. But at the same time, we've probably done this before, and they've probably figured it out. And I have no doubt that Alabama will figure it out. There's so much talent on this roster. Like I talked about on the offense, there's just a lot of guys that I think can make huge plays. And if they just get things that they need from the quarterback position, they're going to be fine. There's a lot of talent on the defense, whether we talked about it's Otis, Dallas Turner, Kool-Aid, all these guys, Caleb Downs. Yeah, I mean, it's Alabama. They'll figure it out.
The more I hear about Tommy Rees and the mentality that he wants to restore, and kind of dissected what Nick Saban said, his comments, SEC Media Days, the more I believe the way Alabama is going to practice with Tommy Rees as their offensive coordinator is going to help this Alabama defense even more. And I think you'll see a exponential growth in terms of those numbers you talked about, Chris, of Alabama's defense is bold versus the modern day Alabama defense. I think Alabama's offensive style with Tommy Rees as coordinator is going to make the defense better. And that defense is what could put them in position to take care of LSU at home. I still give LSU just a slight edge because I believe in Jaden Daniels, and I believe they're a more complete team with him as the quarterback. But you never know at that point in the year what's going to happen with injuries and things like that. So I think Alabama's defense is going to be even better than people expect coming into this year.
All right, here's my parting thought, and Blake touched on a little bit of it. We try to do these as down the middle as we can do them. Say, here's the strengths, here's the weaknesses, here's the things we don't know. And I feel like the more we went into every group, you felt a little silly talking about weaknesses because they were sort of relative. No, the quarterback thing, look, I think that's legit. Is there a guy on here that can win the Heisman? I don't know, like, which guy pops of all those offensive weapons. It'll be somebody probably, but who, I don't know. But the more that I looked at it and just talked, and it's like, these guys have got a 5-star everywhere on the field, sometimes several of them. And I just think that the strength in numbers is there. The depth is there. There's just too much talent. Even if Alabama gets an injury rash, it just feels to me like you don't want to line up with a couple of, true freshman starters facing Georgia or LSU or somebody like that. That at corner, that could be trouble. There's always a point at which the dam can burst a little bit and you have problems. But I just look everywhere and I go, man, when we start talking about problems, you start putting Alabama's on a scale with everybody else. And my goodness, that team's in pretty good shape. Nick Saban, we saw him at Media Day last week in Nashville. Blake and I did. We were there, and he just seemed like a confident guy. And the more you go through this roster, I think you sort of understand why. All right, we are previewing, either have previewed or will preview every single SEC team for the coming season. We're doing this one the last week of July. So best way to catch all those, hit the subscribe button, hit your notifications so you see when new ones pop up. Again, we'll have everybody done probably by the 1st of August, and we'll have plenty more content as teams go through fall camps and all that. We have basketball and baseball stuff as that pops too. Anyway, hope you will subscribe. Hope you'll hit the like button and tell a friend. For Blayne Gilmer and Blake Lovell, I'm Chris Lee. Thanks for watching us here at Southeastern 14.